Insider joins us here this morning. Dan, so many juicy matchups to look forward to this particular week. The return of Jimmy G to New England. We'll talk about that later in the week. The matchup of Baker and Burrow in one state, and is one side regretting what the other one finally got. And of course, the made-up game between Pittsburgh and Tennessee that was supposed to happen, but was canceled due to COVID-19. Those are all stories you're going to be following this particular week. But there's another story that is brewing. There have been 2 coaches already fired in the NFL. Dan Quinn is gone. True. Bill O'Brien is gone. I know you and Jeremy Fowler have a piece on ESPN.com right now with some of the coaching moves to look out for. It's not too early. 2 teams have already pulled the trigger. Who's on the hottest seat? As you sit here today, who's sitting on the hottest seat right now?
There's 3 situations we're watching, potential openings during the year. And not any surprise. Adam Gase with the Jets. I mean, it's the only winless team left. And obviously, that hasn't worked out. Detroit, obviously, they won the game Sunday. Matt Patricia buying himself certainly some time. But I think a lot of people around the league are watching that situation. If it continues to go badly, they could make a change there. They said that at the end of last year, that Patricia and Quinn had to show something this year in order to get another one. And then Jacksonville, Doug Marrone is obviously a guy people are looking out for. So those are the 3 big ones we're kind of watching as in terms of the most likely to happen sooner rather than later. And obviously by the end, check back a month and a half from now, some situations could look worse than they already do, better than they already do. But last year there were 5 teams that changed head coaches. That's the fewest in a decade. And usually when you have the lower number the next year,
the big number,
the number goes higher.
Right.
So when you look at the surprise guys that could potentially be out there, the Denver Broncos, the Minnesota Vikings, even though Mike Zimmer just signed an extension. What are you hearing about Minnesota and Mike?
Well, they like him. Obviously, they just extended him. He's been the coach there. They've had success. But you talk about a surprise. People always say, well, what are the surprises? If I knew where the surprises were going to be, there wouldn't be surprises. But I think this would be a surprise. However, they're sitting there at 1-5. They got all kinds of money sunk into the quarterback. They had playoff expectations. And this is a situation where if it were to continue to go badly, right? They're 1-5. Let's say they finish 3-13, right? Then obviously you have to watch that for a potential change in Minnesota. That kind of situation we're looking at. I mean, I don't think the Cowboys give up on Mike McCarthy after only 1 year. That would be a surprise, but what if it completely unravels? What if they're 2-14 and it's a huge disaster? So right, exactly. So those kinds of situations, that's what I mean when I say a month from now, 2 months from now, the landscape could look actually different than it does now, unless I think, you're the Jets.
Why are these teams or these organizations holding on to the Matt Patricias, the Adam Gases, why are you still holding on to the Doug Marrones when there's no real light at the end of the tunnel? You might as well get started in the future.
And that's what the Texans and the Falcons decided, obviously. I mean, they were sitting there winless. I think you want to – every organization is different. Every ownership group is different. Detroit has gone through a transition recently where the controlling ownership changed hands, within the same family. But I think a lot of times teams they want to make sure and give a fair chance, right? So if you're not eliminated, right? I mean, what if Detroit wins its next 7? I mean, like that kind of stuff does happen. There are 7 playoff spots available per conference this year. So out of it at this point isn't necessarily the same thing as it's been in years past. And then there are relationships, right? I mean, maybe Doug Marrone and the ownership of the Jacksonville Jaguars, they may just like each other. They may not want to, what did we talk about with Jason Garrett all last year? Like they didn't want to get rid of him, right? Yeah. Like this, if Mike Zimmer ends up going in Minnesota, it won't be because they're sick of him. I mean, he's the coach and they like him and they like that he's their coach. It would be just because they decided it was time for something different because it wasn't working.
You had an article about overreaction, but you also said there's no overreaction about the conversation of MVP for Ryan Tannehill. Why is that?
Well, just what we do on Mondays is like a declarative statement, and is this or isn't it an overreaction? So this one was Ryan Tannehill should be in the MVP conversation. It's not an overreaction. When you look at what their record is since he took over middle of last year, I mean, they're among the very best teams.
12-4, 12-3, something like that?
Yeah, and then they add in the playoff games. It's 14-4. So, yeah, they are, and he's playing at an incredibly high level. We watched Derrick Henry, and he is the dominant force there on that offense. And obviously, he's the unique thing that they have. But when they've thrown it, when they've had to throw it, I mean, Ryan Tannehill has been exceptional. And, one of the very best performing quarterbacks in the league since he became their starter. And Derrick Henry's great, but I think when you switch quarterbacks and it has this effect, it helps everyone. And Ryan Tannehill is certainly, especially if they continue to win their games, in that conversation without a doubt.
You hear what Dan said about throwing the football when you have to. Tom Brady just did it this past week. Patrick Mahomes did it last night. You don't have to throw for 500 yards every single game. You run the football, you take that Tennessee recipe, and you can win a whole lot of games and find yourself in the Super Bowl. The 49ers did it last year.
And this is something Key's been harping on for weeks, essentially, whether it's throwing 500 times a game, trying to throw for 500 yards, tongue planted firmly in cheek. You don't need to do that. Just manage your expectations. ESPN NFL insider Dan Graziano giving us the Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. No contract, no compromise. I want to stick on the Titans here for a second. You have mentioned that their offensive coordinator, a guy by the name of Arthur Smith, might be one of the more hot coaching commodities coming up this particular offseason. I don't want to get into a nuts and bolts discussion on a guy that even the most hardcore NFL fan probably couldn't recognize on the street. But
See, I'm shaking my head. I'm like, huh?
Right. But this guy obviously has a good quarterback to work with, an all-world running back to work with. What can you tell us about the offensive scheme and what he's been able to do?
Well, I think, you look at, you say good quarterback to work with. Tannehill's having a level of success that he didn't have in Miami. Now, obviously, he's healthy, which is a big part of that. But when you look at what Arthur Smith has done in terms of incorporating the downfield passing, I mean, like Ryan Tannehill's average target depth, his average per throw is pretty high. It ranks among the very best. So it's not just ground and pound with Derrick Henry and then throw if you happen to be on third down. So there's a lot of creativity there. And I think when you look at head coaching candidates, teams want to talk to guys that know how to score points. That's where the trend is right now. So you look at offensive coordinators on successful teams. And so you look at Arthur Smith. You're going to look at Brian Daboll in Buffalo. You're going to look at Greg Roman in Baltimore. Brian Schottenheimer in Seattle's starting to get some looks again because of what's going on with Russell Wilson this year, right? I mean, Russ cook was the whole thing. Were they going to go away from the run and let him chuck it a little bit? So when teams look for head coaches, as they inevitably do, where they start these days is with these offensive coordinators on these successful teams, these high-scoring offenses, and Arthur Smith is going to be a candidate that you're going to continue to hear about as the year goes on.
And Key, we should obviously put Eric Bieniemy of the Kansas City.
Well, he didn't need to say that.
Right.
That's
I think without
a
a doubt.
no-brainer. He's at the top of the list.
That is probably the most likely guy to get a head coaching job at this point.
We said that this time last year, though, right?
Well, not
to a degree.
I think we started to say it as the Chiefs started to get deep into the playoffs. But this momentum is carried into the regular season at the beginning. If he's not hired, I don't even know what to say if he's not hired. I don't even know where to start. Right?
Look, I mean, I think it's pretty widely accepted that he's going to be high on people's lists and end up getting one of these jobs.
Last thing, what does that say from the context that you have if you're a defensive coach? When we get to the playoffs, we know defense still. I mean, look at what the Titans were able to do on the road to be able to stifle Tom Brady last year. Then they stifled Lamar Jackson, and to all the credit to Tannehill and Derrick Henry, but their defense, especially in the New England game, the Logan Ryan pick, I mean, defense wins in the playoffs. Defense travels, as Key likes to say. It's portable. But if you're a defensive coordinator looking for that shot, are you shot?
It's been tough. I mean, there are exceptions. We saw Vic Fangio get the job in Denver a couple of years ago.
Todd Bowles is available.
Happen. Todd Bowles is available and having a very good year in Tampa Bay. I mean, still widely regarded as a guy that could get another shot as a head coach, without a doubt. But yeah, I mean, you look at these defensive coordinators that are trying to get sort of back in, like Leslie Frazier in Buffalo. Obviously, they're not playing well right now, but they have over the last couple of years. Jim Schwartz in Philadelphia has had, so there are guys that
I like Jim Schwartz.
Right.
I liked him in Detroit, but
you're getting, I mean, the trend is how do we score points? How do we outscore teams? And so when ownership and GMs want to talk to head coaching candidates, that's the first thing they're thinking of. Offense is controlling these games. It's this highest scoring era of all time, and I think that's where the focus is. It could cycle back at some point where the defensive coordinators are the hot candidates, but for a while it's been the offensive guys, and I think that's going to continue in the short term.
Defensive coordinators, for me, historically, act like they don't know how to hire somebody to run the damn offense, where offensive coordinators find defensive coordinators to run their defense, but not the other way around.
Very interesting. We will see Dan on Get Up this morning, 8 a.m. Eastern with Greeny and Company. Thanks for stopping by.
And thanks for not asking me about the Cowboys.
I'm tired of talking about them.
I don't know what to say.
Wire my mouth shut.
On that tip, we do have 8 division leaders, 7 legitimate ones, and the Dallas Cowboys. So they're not looking to fire their head coach. So of the 8 that are leading their division, real or not real, for Key to go from leading the division to being a leading Super Bowl contender. He'll separate the pretenders and the contenders after this word from Pennzoil. Here's a fact for you. Not all synthetic motor oils are created the same. Crude oil is like a bag of mismatched rocks, all different sizes and shapes coming together. Natural gas is more like a bag of marbles, all uniform in size and shape, designed to work together, reducing friction in your engine. That's why when Pennzoil reinvented motor oil, they started with natural gas, not